Oftentimes in casual Commander, people do not like playing against combo decks. People typically want to win through normal things like damage, combat, or some interesting kind of group hug strategy. In most cases, combo decks are kind of looked down upon a little bit, especially at like lower power level. But I'm here to show you a deck where the main win condition is a combo, and yet it doesn't really come off as hard to stop. It doesn't come out of nowhere, and it's a pretty in-your-face kind of combo. It also requires quite a bit of setup and some pieces. So in many ways, it's kind of a weak combo, but this deck is anything but weak. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to introduce you to my Muldrotha self-mill Out of the Tombs combo deck. So Muldrotha is usually seen as a pretty scary commander. She's one of the most popular Sultai commanders out there, and she usually is played with a little bit of salt attached to it. But this deck aims to be a race against yourself, a race to get to 0 cards in your library. It is 100% a self-mill deck. You don't care about anybody else's cards, and all you're trying to do is get to 0 cards in library. It's a very fun deck. It requires a lot of decision making and oftentimes kind of feels like you're gambling a little bit. But how did this deck come to be? Mill has always been something I really enjoy in other one-on-one card games and formats, but in a 4-player casual game, I don't typically like playing it, as most people want to be able to play their cards and most people want to be able to play their game plan without being hindered by somebody milling their cards. Now, of course, I'm all for mill in Commander, but this deck aims to be at somewhat of a decent power level. If you want to put numbers on it, maybe like a 6 to 7 power level, rather than something like we're all going to try to win as fast as possible through combos. Now, of course, there's nothing wrong with that. I love playing at all different types of power levels, but if I were to play something where I'm milling other people, I would definitely want a strictly mill-based deck that is a bit meaner. So self-mill is the route I chose to go down. Now, self-mill is surprisingly easy to come across. There's a lot of green and black cards that love to just mill 3 at your upkeep, and then you get some value out of that. We run plenty of those cards, and all of them bring us value that we're looking for. We have stuff like Cemetery Tampering. We've got Ballad of the Black Flag, which is a newest one from Assassin's Creed. We've got stuff like Stitcher Supplier, Hedron Crab, and some really cool things like Cephalid Vandal that gets bigger every single turn. And of course, the normal mill card of Altar of Dementia. The thing is, though, is that we always target ourselves with Altar of Dementia, giving us recurring creatures that we can mill ourselves out with, as well as just having so much potential to add cards to our graveyard. Our best version of mill in this deck, however, is Out of the Tombs. Out of the Tombs also being one of our win conditions. Basically, every turn, Out of the Tombs mills 2 cards, and then it mills 2 more cards for every single counter on it. So basically it goes 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, all the way until you mill your entire library. But Out of the Tombs is also amazing because it says if you were to draw a card while your library has no cards in it, instead you return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Now, the to the battlefield is huge because here's what the combo is. We play Out of the Tombs, and we have a card like Greater Good on the battlefield. With Out of the Tombs and Greater Good, you can start sacrificing all of your creatures through Greater Good. You'll draw cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power. As long as it's more than 1, you're good. That creature will then replace itself with another creature from your deck. And as you just keep drawing cards, it doesn't matter about the discard because you're not going to have a hand anyway. You start looping these creatures over and over, and there's 2 cards that you can win through. The reason we have 2 is in case one gets exiled, of course. You have Grey Merchant of Asphodel and Sire Conrad the Grim. Now, Grey Merchant is going to drain the whole table. You sacrifice it. You sacrifice more creatures to get more Grey Merchants to then do that over and over again. Or you play Sir Conrad and you don't sacrifice Sir Conrad and you just sacrifice the rest of your creatures, dealing 1 instance of damage every single time. These are the 2 main win conditions that you're trying to loop through Out of the Tombs. However, there's also plenty of other ways to win because exiling enchantments, exiling creatures, or exiling your graveyard is never going to be a nice option. What if you have no graveyard? Well, then we have 2 other ways to still mill out our entire library and win through having 0 cards. That is through Laboratory Maniac and Jace, Wielder of Mysteries. Now, what we love about all of these win conditions is that they're different permanent types. Out of the Tombs is an enchantment, Sire Conrad and Grey Merchant are creatures, Jace is a planeswalker, and Labman is also a creature. So the fact that they have different permanent types means that we can cast them all on the same turn if we need to. Then, of course, things like Altar of Dementia, which is huge for sacrificing, allows us to get another permanent type from our graveyard, which is Artifact. And last but not least, if all of those things fail and we get to the super late game, we still have Splinter Fright. And Splinter Fright is going to be max a 27-27 with trample. So we can just start swinging every turn with Splinter Fright if the game has drawn to a halt. Typically in the later game, players are at around 15 to 20 health anyways, so a 27-27 in most cases will take them out. I've actually won with Splinter Fright quite a few times, as sometimes it might even come down to the 1v1 in the late game. So you just swing it their way and you usually win. So we've gone over some of the win conditions and what this kind of deck is aiming to end the game, but how do we get there and how do we get there reliably? So we've talked about all the self-mill types. There's plenty of cards in here that can get our library as low as possible, as fast as possible. Any kind of ramp that we do have is trying to be based in land ramp so we can thin the deck out a little bit more. And we also have plenty of ways to recur a bunch of lands so that we can always have enough mana on our turn. But we need to actually get to the late game in order to make these combos work. So how do we do that? Well, we play plenty of removal and diverse permanent based removal. Since we're in green and black, we have probably the best removal suite out there, where we have plenty of cards that can target artifacts and enchantments, and we have plenty of cards that can target creatures. We try to use versions of removal that can get us ahead by killing all of our opponent's stuff. So things like Druid of Purification and Plague Crafter get more than just a 1-for-1. So we can try to control the entire board rather than just one player's. We then of course have 2 enchantments that are seals that are very cheap, so we can recur them every single turn. And since they're enchantments, we can play the creature removal spells and the enchantment removal spells on the same turn through Muldrotha. We also have kind of a last resort card, and that is Nevinyrral's Disc. I probably pronounced that incorrectly. This destroys everything on the board. Now it does enter tap. It's a little bit in your face and it's a little bit easier to play around. But if you can get off this effect, you usually are able to just fully wipe the board and be done with it. In the future, I might look to add some more black board wipes that I could use. But for the most part, this removal package is perfectly fine. We also have a very expensive card in Constant Mists. This has a buyback clause of sacrificing a land, which is perfectly fine for us to do, as Muldrotha can just play that land immediately after buying back. This is a repeatable fog effect that's not on a permanent type, which is pretty great. So 1, it won't use a permanent type for our list, and 2, we can still repeat it. All of this to say you're trying to balance between milling yourself out and controlling the board to make sure that you can get to the late game. The mill process takes usually about 8 to 9 turns to fully get to 0 cards. You usually want to wait till around turn 7 to 8 to even play Muldrotha. Muldrotha is not your priority. You're not looking to ramp into Muldrotha. You're not looking to speed her out as fast as possible to start recurring things. You're looking to mill. You have plenty of ways to do this, and you shouldn't have to worry about if you can mill yourself faster or if you need Muldrotha. Muldrotha is just there to guarantee your combo work. Guarantee that you can recur your pieces that you need to. So let's look at what an average game of playing Muldrotha might look like. On turn 1, you're definitely looking to play something on turn 1. We have plenty of cards that are usable either as a permanent type or as a spell that can just help set up your game as best as possible. And you're looking to play these cards on turn 1. Going into turn 2, we also have plenty of options to help get us there as fast as possible. Something like a Glimpse the Unthinkable early game is amazing. If you can play that turn 2 and just get the top 10 cards in your library gone ASAP, it would be great. Something like a Cephalid Vandal is also incredible on turn 2, as by the time you get to turn 6, you've already milled out 10 cards, and turn 7 and turns 8, you will have then milled 21 cards through 1 permanent. That's a pretty crazy rate, and it's exactly what we're looking for. Cards like Ripple of Undeath from the new Modern Horizon set is also really good. It gives you 3 cards per turn, but also lets you get those cards back into your hand just in case you really wanted one of those cards. Typically, you want to get back something that's just going to help you mill even more cards from them. On turn 3 is where we really start ramping into the great cards that we can start using for our game plan. We have plenty of removal options, we have plenty of mill options, ramp, and of course out of the tombs on turn 3 is just as good as something like a Cephalid Vandal. As we get into the turn 4s and turn 5s, at that point you usually have around 5 to 6 mana, and that's where we're looking to play something like Jace the Perfected Mind, a Traumatize, or an Incarnation Technique. These spells are going to mill out so many cards for you. Jace the Perfected Mind is essentially a mill 15. But if you can get to the point where you can +1 him maybe once or twice, it can be upwards of mill 18 or mill 21. All amazing options for you. Something like Traumatize is just going to mill half your entire library, and something like Incarnation Technique is going to mill 10 cards, and you get to return 2 creatures from your graveyard because of that. The creatures you're looking to return are either removal spells at that point or something that's going to help you recur or mill faster. As you get into turn 6, we top out our mana curve, and in most cases your hand's going to look like a bunch of self-milling cards, and at this point you should have less than 40 cards in your library. Your goal on turn 6 is to play a big Haymaker mill card. Something like what we talked about earlier, or a Deadbridge Chant, or a Cut Your Losses, or a Keening Stone. These are all great options to help you mill out your entire library. In these first 6 turns, you're looking to make sure that early aggression is not on you. You want to use Table Talk and your removal spells as best as possible and as flexibly as possible so that eyes are not on you. As your table gets used to you playing this deck, you might start seeing more early attention, in which case you might need to mulligan or just keep more removal spells in the deck so that you can get to that late game. This deck is very much like a Thanos. It's just inevitable, as are most late game decks. The removal spells, being as good as they are, help you to get the other late game decks that much further behind. And your goal is to be able to balance between self-milling out your library and controlling the rest of the table to not hit you or removing their valuable pieces. But now that that tangent's over, let's talk about turns 7, 8, and 9. Turns 7 and 8 is usually around the time that you want to be casting Muldrotha. At this point, you almost certainly have the amount of mana you need to cast her, so you'll usually cast her and pass the turn. Now, if you're on turn 7 or 8, you might have a couple mana to spare, in which case I usually go get my Soul Ring and my Birds of Paradise, so I'm even more set up for the next couple turns with the amount of mana I might. On turn 7 and 8, you typically have around less than 30 cards at this point, so you most likely will have these cards in the graveyard. Now, the turn after you cast Muldrotha, the goal would be to start recurring your best mill pieces like a Jace the Perfected Mind, or your Deadbridge Chant, or even your Phoenix, and start to get the entire library you have left into the graveyard. You also want to make sure you cast your Out of the Tomb or your Greater Good. You need to have one of these combo pieces out there already, because both Out of the Tombs and Greater Good are enchantment cards. You should be passing the turn with about 10 cards left in your entire library. Now you're on your last turn of the game. This is hopefully the ideal scenario. Either with your upkeep effects, you mill the rest of your library out, or maybe you still have 3 cards left in your library, and that's fine too. Now that you have 0 cards in your library, you can hopefully draw through Greater Good, which can start the loop right then and there. If for some reason you don't have Greater Good on the battlefield, get your Eternal Witness first through Out of the Tombs, then cast your Greater Good. At that point, you will win the game through the combo we mentioned before. Another strategy, of course, if Out of the Tombs and Greater Good is not there, you just cast Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, and then +1 him with his effect, and you win the game. This deck is extremely fun, offers a lot of variety in the decision making that goes into playing the deck, and always has really great replayability because of the fact that you're always milling different cards every single game in a different order. So you have to stay light on your feet in your decision making in order to best set up your win. I love playing this deck. I've never played against somebody that's had a bad experience playing against the deck, so it typically avoids some salt. So this has been my Muldrotha deck. If you have any suggestions for cards I could probably put in this deck, I'd love to hear it in the comments below. If you guys have enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It helps out the channel a ton. Thanks for watching.